What's going on, guys? We are now live. So in this Q&A, I want to start off by actually talking about some of the changes that are going to take place to this Q&A. If you guys have seen in my past Q&As, I started off actually by, I've split it up before where I actually did a topical section of this Q&A and then just a Q&A at the end of the week to answer questions from the week. So I think I'm going to go back to actually splitting it up again and actually making the topical part of this video just a shorter, maybe 10 to 15 minute maximum video. So that way it's a little more formal, and I could just talk about the points about the subject that I researched, and that way it's a little more clear for you guys who just want to see that part of this Q&A. And then on Friday, so I would post that one on maybe on a Wednesday or Thursday, or even earlier in the week, and then Friday I would take questions from that topical Q&A in the Friday session when I just answer questions from the week. So I think that might be a better way to do these, and maybe it'll get some more watch time on the videos and also get some more questions just based on the topic itself. So I'm gonna split that up, and after this Q&A, the next Q&A will be more of that type of format. So look for that in the next Q&A. But in this Q&A, I wanted to talk about force absorption as the topic, and then also tie it back to triphasic training, which I talked about in a previous Q&A, and I actually listened to a podcast on the way home today from driving home from school, and the interview actually had Cal Dietz on the podcast. So I'm going to talk about a few of the points that I heard him talk about, and I'm going to tie it to the triphasic training and how it relates to this force absorption idea. So just to get into the force absorption idea or topic of this Q&A, basically there's two different, or as this first study talked about, there's two different phases that can that you notice in a vertical jump. There's the force absorption phase, and then the force producing phase, or the actual jumping or getting off the ground phase. So in this Q&A, I'm just going to talk about the force absorption part of that. And this first study actually talked about how started off by talking about how it's common in more studies to just specifically test a standing vertical jump, or more of a counter movement vertical rather than an actual running vertical. So this study that I looked into, and if you guys want, the links to everything I talked about will be in the description below, even that podcast I listened to today with Cal Dietz on. So if you guys want to check that out, it was a really good podcast, just because some of the methods he talked about that he's come up with are the French contrast training, and then the triphasic training, and then some other stuff on force absorption, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But to get back to this topic, with the study that I was just referring to, this first study focused on a running vertical as opposed to a counter movement jump. Hey, what's up, hello? Burp guy, take your shirt off. No thanks. All right. Yeah, so I'm just gonna get into what this first study wanted to talk about, and I'm gonna talk about the 2 points before I actually bring it up on the screen. So in this first study, they point out that as I said, a lot of other studies have looked at counter movement versus running, but this study actually analyzed the mechanical energy contributions from multiple different joints in a running vertical jump. And I'm going to bring up the table that they actually show for the results, and it was surprising to me because I had never really looked too deep into force absorption. I've done a few exercises in terms of like landing and slightly eccentric focused lifts, but nothing in terms of how this study was talking about with how specific joints actually work with absorbing and producing force. So this study also categorized the concentric contraction of the vertical jump, which is the unloading or the actual like jumping motion, or the explosive movement of the jump, as the energy generation phase, and then the eccentric contraction or the lowering phase of the jump as the energy absorption phase. So I'm going to bring up the study on screen right now, go over some of the stuff they talked about, and then bring up the results, and then get into how this ties back to triphasic training. So bring it up on the screen right now. Okay, so this is the actual study that I looked at. If you guys want to check it out, again, this will be in the description. But I wanted to actually read a little bit of a summary that I wrote down here from the study, and then actually show you guys the results from the table right here. So I'll have it on the screen if you guys want to just look over it. So for all the running vertical jump tests, the primary generator and absorber occurred in the stance phase, and it was the highest in the ankle joint as compared to they had here the metatarsal phalangeal joint, which is just basically like the toes or the muscle between the toes, and then they had the knee joint and also the hip joint. But again, out of all of these, the ankle joint was the greatest in terms of force absorption and or force primary energy generator. And then the hip and knee joints also were they had more. They described them as having more of a mixed result in terms of force absorption and generation. As you can see here, this in this test or in subject 2, they had this subject had a lower force absorption in the knee joint compared to a force generation. And then so did subject 3. So they're just describing these as having more of a mix. And then here, absorption 21, generation 79, and then in the hip it was 48 absorption to 14 generation. But in the ankle joint, it was pretty clear that the force or the energy generation was the highest, or was greater than the force absorption in all of these for the ankle joint. So I'm going to bring up just the conclusions that they drew from those results. Because what they tie this back to is that because the ankle joint was the greatest force generator, that it could be also a great predictor for force absorption, which, as you guys can see, I'll go back to that table really quick. That the ankle joint also had a high rate of force absorption as well compared to the knee and hip joints. So even though the ankle joint was the highest generator, it was also one of the highest absorbers, which is a surprise to me again because I haven't looked into a lot of like ankle joint specific relations to vertical jumping. But also in the podcast I was listening to, Cal Dietz actually referred to this ankle rocking exercise, and he was talking about another coach who actually reached out to him about some of the triphasic training results that he got from using Cal Dietz's method. And I'd never heard of the term like ankle rocking before, or ankle rock training or exercises. So it's something I'm going to look into maybe for a future Q&A, but it seems like it might have some kind of connection to this, the ankle joint being the greatest generator of, one of the greatest generator and one of the highest absorbers for force. So now I'm going to go down to a couple of the conclusions that this study brought up. But first I'm going to go back to the questions really quick, and then go back to the conclusions here. Franco said, "Hey, can you give me the link of that paper?" Yeah, I can put it. I'll link it in the chat right now if you want to check it out. I don't know if you'll get the full link or the full study because I actually I get access to certain studies because I link it to my university account. So I'm not sure if you'll get the full study if I link it in here, but I will still post a link to that. Yeah. And I actually do that at the end of this Q&A because I have the link to, I'll put the title of it, but I actually have the link to the full study that I was able to access through my university account again. So I'll just link the title of it because I don't have the exact link to like just the abstract itself. But here is the title of that study. Crew 12 said, "What triphasic biggest effect for your jumping, like adding more gains on your vert?" Oh, you're saying, okay, you're saying what's the biggest, Franco, you're welcome. You said what's the biggest effect for your jumping? So Crew 12, I'm actually going to talk about that when I get to tying it back to triphasic training. So right after I talk about this study, I'm going to talk about I'm going to answer your question I'm gonna answer your question exactly, actually, by how Cal Dietz described it in his podcast. So I probably still have like 2 more minutes left on just reading the conclusions here, and then I'll tie it back to the triphasic training that I talked about in a previous Q&A and relate it to some of the stuff that Cal himself actually said on this podcast. So to get back to that study, I'm going to read a couple of the conclusions, or a couple of paragraphs from the conclusions, and then that'll wrap it up for the study. So going back to those basically the toes or muscles of the toes, that they said that there is a large net energy absorber absorbing 15 to 16% of the total energy absorbed by the lower extremity. It was actually just in those metatarsal joints, but actually it actually leaked the most energy because when those actually contracted, the subject is already off the ground. So those are actually a point for force loss was in those metatarsal phalangeal joints. And then here it says the knee also had the same relative contribution to both types of jumps. It generated 25% of the total lower extremity energy and absorbed 31% during the vertical and 28% during the long jump. So here, thus it would appear that the function of the metatarsophalangeal and knee joints is similar for the 2 types of jumping. Here, this is the paragraph. This paragraph and the last one were the 2 points I really wanted to bring up. So in contrast, the functions of the ankle and hip joints appear to be different for running vertical and running long jumps. The ankle joint was the largest energy generator and absorber for both types of jumps. Again, that was the ankle joint. However, the relative contribution it made to the 2 types of jumps was different. It was responsible for 53% of the energy generated by the lower extremity during the vertical jump. So that 53% of energy generation is that phase, the concentric phase, which is actually exploding into the jump. So the ankle joint was responsible for 53% of that during the vertical and absorbed 36%. So those are still 2 pretty high. That's still a pretty high percentage for absorb, even though it's 36% to 53%. That just shows that the ankle joint still has that much responsibility for generation and absorption for the running vertical. But during long jumping, the ankle joint absorbed and generated almost the same relative amount, 47% and 49% respectively. The hip joint was a net energy generator during both types of jump. However, the relative contribution it made to the energy generated during long jumping was greater than during vertical jumping. It also absorbed less energy relative to the rest of the lower extremity joints during long jumping and during vertical jumping. And this is the last paragraph I want to end with here. That the ankle joint was the largest energy generator for both types of jumps suggests that training regimens should pay particular attention to the development of the gastrocnemius and soleus muscles. The requirement of large hip extensor moments during the stance phase of long jumping indicates that development of the hip extensor muscle is also extremely important for long jumpers. So basically what I wanted to end with was that it was just a surprise to me after reading this and after seeing the results. I'm going to go switch screens. That after seeing the results of this, reading the results and reading it to you guys right now, that it was just a surprise to me that the ankle joint had that large of an input and output for vertical jumping, and running vertical jumping specifically, because again, it was never really brought. I never really researched on it, or I never really have seen much information on ankle joint and like how important that might be for vertical jumping in terms of force absorption and generation. But this study kind of pointed out something to me that I haven't really even thought about yet, and that is how important it is to like it said, to incorporate and focus training around either increased ankle mobility or training your ankles in general for greatest force output and force absorption. So what I wanted to tie this all back to was the previous topic of triphasic training, which I talked about in a previous Q&A, which dealt with basically the idea behind that was so there was basically a story behind the way that Cal Dietz kind of thought about this, and that was he saw an athlete that saw athletes that had similar strengths, but one of them was able to throw, I believe it was a shot put farther than the other, and he found that that was because the athlete who was able to throw it farther, even though both of them seemed like they had similar strengths, the one that was able to absorb and release force faster was able to throw the shot farther compared to the one that had this, even compared to the person who still had the same strength. So what I want to, I just want to read what I wrote down here. So I wrote down the idea that being able to absorb force faster can lead to greater force production in less time, or to go a step further, training the eccentric and isometric phases in equal amounts as the concentric phase. So a lot of times in lifts, or it might be more common to see people focusing on the concentric phase, either of a jump or of a lift, during a squat. Just focusing on the up and down movement rather than focusing on the lowering phase and then the phase where there's actually no movement, or the isometric phase. So those are two phases that Cal even pointed out in this podcast that he thought about might be a weak link, or something that he can incorporate into training more, that might help people with their training if that's a point that they've never trained before. So I want to read some of the notes that I had from the podcast I listened to that Cal actually talked about. So first off, he pointed out that that the triphasic training method is a method, and it's not supposed to be some completely separate program from what somebody's already doing. It's supposed to be just a method that's incorporated with however somebody is training at the time. So and he even said that he combined workouts and ideas from other workouts that he had kind of picked up on, and he even admitted that he stole some ideas from those and just incorporated them into his method that he calls triphasic training. And then he also pointed out that triphasic training, it could be built around an in-season or off-season, but if you were to follow the strictest form of triphasic training, that'd be more of an off-season type of lifting, just because he splits it up into different phases. The eccentric, just working the eccentric, then the isometric, and then the concentric built into that. So let's see. Sorry, I'm reading the chat right now. Hillel said, "That's interesting. You always keep up the good work with the interesting papers." I appreciate that, Hillel. Thank you. Yeah, I just think it's cool, look into, what studies have actually been done on this type of stuff, and then get to talk about it with you guys, and, everyone, I just feel like everyone learns something from this. So, Dunks with Nick said, "So I can't send you the link of my workout." Oh, Dunks with Nick, wait, you wanted to send a link of your workout in this chat, or did you want to send an email? I'll put my email in the chat if you want to send it to that. Sorry guys, I think that just cut out for a second, but Diego said, "How long have you been training for vertical, and what is your max vertical right now?" So I've been training for my vertical for the past about 1.5 to 2 years, and right now my vertical is in probably the lower 40s, like 40, maybe like 41, 42. I haven't tested it lately, but I'm going to be testing it soon. So stay tuned for a video on what my current vertical is, my current max. Okay, so Crew 12, I'm going to be getting into, if you're still here, I'm going to be getting into answering that question that you actually had about how triphasic training can actually help or affect your jumping. So the way that Cal described it is that, triphasic training is broken up into those 3 phases: just working the eccentric, isometric, and concentric phases of the movement. So by training those 3 aspects, he described that as being able to cover all the weak points. So if you maybe you have a weak point in the eccentric phase, but you don't know about it, then you'd be targeting that with triphasic training. If you have a weak point in the isometric phase and you don't know about that, then you'd be covering that with the triphasic. If you have, weak points in the concentric phase, you'd also be training that with the triphasic. So he was just saying, the way he described it was that you would be covering all the bases with triphasic training, and you might be targeting weak points that you don't know you have yet. So that's why I've been really interested in this triphasic training. This is the second time I've looked into it, and I might start to build. I've built in contrast training before, but I don't think it's been true contrast. I've implemented some of the ideas from it, but I think by reading more into this triphasic and maybe actually starting to incorporate either specific phases or more specific workouts, that I can actually build better contrast workouts and build just better workouts overall, and actually start to see more gains from incorporating some of these things that I haven't really worked on yet. So Daniel said, do you think it's possible to get 60 inches? And Dunks would think, okay, I'll check it out. I think it could be possible to get 60 inches. I don't like to say anything is impossible, but the way that you get to it might take longer. It might take different types of training, and that's one thing that Cal. That's another thing that Cal was talking about in this podcast, was just the types of training that he was talking about that he did with his athletes, and that because he works out of the University of Minnesota, so some of the training that he's incorporated with his athletes there, it's the types of training that you don't really see in like public gyms or even in like YouTube videos and stuff. Like the types of training that those athletes take part in, you don't really see that much. So I think that could be a reason why it might be a thought that 50 inches isn't realistic, or like you say, 60 inches possible. Well, I don't know, like there might be different types of training that need to be implemented that haven't even been tested yet, like with Cal coming up with triphasic training. And he also talked about I think he called it super maximal loading, and that was working under a load of 110 to 120% load. And he actually, instead of using a movement like the squat, because he was saying if people work to 110, if the athletes that he worked with in the college, worked with 110, 120% of their max, they could be working with 700 pounds plus doing a back squat. So instead of working with just a normal back squat, he had them actually work with single leg safety bar split squats. And in doing that, they work with a lower load than they would actually be doing with a back squat, but they'd actually at the same time be working each leg separately. So they'd be targeting, they'd be singling out each leg compared to working both legs with just a normal back squat. So and he was describing working 110% to 120% with that, is that they're able to get to a higher load and work under that higher load compared to if they were to just work with just again a normal back squat. So I just think that the point I want to make with that is that that's not really something I've ever heard of or seen before, is working 110, 120% of someone's load. So that was one of the points. And then another point that he pointed out was quality over quantity, because the interviewer was asking him, what type of volume do you usually recommend people to train with? And he didn't really specify what volume. He just said to take into account how you go into a workout, how you're feeling before the workout, how you're feeling into the workout should dictate the quality that you get out of the workout. So not necessarily going in with like a certain number, but how much effort you put into the workout should be more important. So he emphasized the quality over quantity aspect in any type of training. Let's see if I had anything else on here. I think that was pretty much all I wanted to talk about with the podcast. So yeah, again, I'll link all this stuff in the description if you guys want to check out either the podcast or the study, or anything more about triphasic training or force absorption. Another point I wanted to make about force absorption, though, is that there has been implications for injury reduction. This is actually going to tie to one more point that Cal actually talked about in the podcast, and that was about force absorption. And he talked about how force absorption he said he would argue that force withstanding might be more important to train with than force absorption, because and I don't know if it might be more important, but he described force withstanding as being able to withstand a force and then be able to apply that force into another direction. So whether it's like stopping and starting again, or changing direction, or moving in different patterns, that force withstanding might be more effective to train with than force absorption. But where force absorption might be more important is just in like a landing phase of a jump. And again, there is implications that there could be potential for injury reduction if somebody actually implements force absorption training, or just training to land, or again absorb force into the training to reduce the risk of injury. So I think that's everything I wanted to talk about with this topic of force absorption and triphasic training. So again, everything will be in the links in the description if you guys want to check any of those out. And just again to reiterate about the changes in the Q&A, I'm probably going to split this into, if you guys are just tuning in, I'm going to be splitting these up in the next Q&A to a 10 to 15 minute more topical Q&A on either on Thursday, Wednesday, sometime during the earlier part of the week, so that way there could be questions for the Friday Q&A, which I make just taking questions from the week, taking questions live, and see how that works. Because again, I've noticed with these Q&As that the live streams are always good, but after I post them, that the watch time is mostly on the topical side of the Q&A. So I want to see, like, if I actually take that out and make that a separate video, if I'll get more questions based on that topic in the Friday Q&A. So Marco said, how long have I stopped lifting heavy? Is that your question, Marco? How long have I stopped lifting heavy weights? And Diego said, how many days a week do you work out? Diego, I work out, I mean, I don't know, in terms of lifting weights or just doing like training specific, it'll be like 3 to 4 times a week, and then dunking about 2 times a week. 2 to 3. Usually it's equal to like dunking and training. But lately it's been a little more dunking and then less training. But before I actually got back to my school, it was a little more training, less dunking. Marco said, okay. So Marco asked, how long have I stopped lifting heavy weights? So I've stopped lifting heavy weights for probably a little less than a month. I was in a phase where I was just specifically doing strength, and then I incorporated that into contrast, and now lately I've been doing more of just like power plyometrics. If you guys saw my last video I posted, those are the types of workouts I've been doing more recently, like very recently, within the past month. But again, from looking into this triphasic training, I might start to incorporate like some of the just eccentric training, isometric, and concentric training, and breaking those up, just to add some variety and add something I've never done to my training before, and see how it affects everything. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going to be going with my training. Oh, Diego said, where do I hoop at? Actually, I hoop at my school. My school has a bunch of different gyms to play basketball in, so that's usually where I'll play at. Wait, Diego, didn't you ask me about PJF, the PJF program on YouTube? Or in a YouTube comment? Daniel said, is your foot looking any different? I know you know about HyperArc. So that's funny that you asked, because I actually took a picture of how my foot looked about, I don't know if it's been quite a year yet, but I actually wanted to compare it to now. But I mean, just from looking at it, I think that it looks a little thicker in terms of like muscular wise. So I mean, maybe it's changed in that way. So if I'm going to take a picture at the same angle that I took that other one, and see if it actually has looked like it's changed at all. But yeah, in terms of like strength and muscular wise, it looks a little bit more. Diego said, yeah. So have you been doing the PGF for a while then, or did you just get into the subscription, or just get into the program? Because I know he has different phases too, with like force absorption, and then does he also have like an eccentric type of phase in his training? And Dunks with Nick said, "Do you train core?" Yes, I do train core in every workout. Even at the end, like I'll throw in like a little bit if I feel like I didn't hit it enough in the actual workout. I'll usually do like TRX type of stuff. I'll usually focus on core that involves quick contractions. So that's where I can use a TRX bands, or I'll use like a just like an exercise ball and do like rollouts or something like that. Yeah, so that's the type of core I do, or even planks too, and side planks and stuff like that. That is good too. Just core exercises that involve my whole core and not just my abs. So yeah, that's what I like to focus on with core. Marco said, "You made a lot of progress in the last period. This is due to the fact that you stopped lifting heavy weights." Marco, I haven't really analyzed that, but it could be a reason that maybe that's why my dunking looks a little better than it did before, was because I went through, and again, like I've never really planned any of my training. Like I've never really like written it out and like planned like, okay, this is going to be a strength phase, this is going to be this phase, this is going to be this phase. It's just kind of like what naturally came next. So if I noticed I had been doing more like heavy type of training, then I would go into like a lighter, like faster type of training. So it could be that because I've stopped lifting heavier weights, that maybe that's why my dunks or jumping looks like it's improved. And Diego said, "Just got into it. I pulled a muscle in my back, so I haven't been able to work out, but the workouts I did a few weeks ago were great. The first month focuses on force absorption and eccentric strength." Okay, and that's similar. First of all, how did you hurt your back? That wasn't from the... Did you say that wasn't from the workout? I think... Let's see. I'm going to bring up my YouTube really quick. My YouTube comments. Okay, so you said you started doing the program. I'm reading the comment from Diego on YouTube right now. So he said he got an upper back injury, not due to the program. So he has not been able to train for the past 2.5 weeks. The workouts I did were great. The workouts have a 5-day split. The first day and the last day are intense, and days 2 and 4 are focused on core, visualization, injury prevention. Day 3 is a pull workout. First month focuses a lot on eccentric strength, and they have a bunch of plyo drills to dial in the nervous system. Yeah, I just read that comment. They left, so he said the first month focuses. Yeah, so like you said, that's similar to what I just talked about with the triphasic training, is focusing on that eccentric phase, which I guess you can argue is force absorption. But yeah, let me know how you progress with that, Diego. I'd be interested to hear more about that program, because I've looked into it. Like I said, I've looked into a few of his videos, but haven't really gotten too deep into what the actual program consists of, or haven't really heard many results from it. So if you have more results on it, or if you start to see gains from it, just let me know about it. Dunks with Nick said, "Can you check my workout?" Oh no problem. Let's see. I'll bring it up here. Let's see. So Dunks with Nick. So his workout. Okay, so you have Monday Bulgarian squats, lunges, squat jumps, lateral high jumps, and depth jumps. Okay, so that sounds like more of a single leg day for Monday. Then you have Tuesday rest, which is good. Wednesday translation day. Does that just mean that's your dunk day? Dunks with Nick, are you taking that as like your dunk day, translation day, or jumping, or? And then Thursday rest, and then Friday box jumps, horizontal bounds, dumbbell calf raises, uphill sprints, single leg butt kicks. And then Saturday plank, V-up and pass, bicycles, bicep curls, lying tricep press, dumbbell bench press. Yeah, and I think you have the right amount of, and a lot of the sets and reps, you have 3 sets of 6 or 5. So I think that's good. The amount of rest time you have. Just with Friday, I really like that Monday that you're targeting your legs, and that you're doing more of a split leg or single leg type of movement. That's really good to single out both legs and build strength in both of them equally. But then Friday with the box jumps, how do you do the box jumps? I'm just curious. Because I've read different things with box jumps. Unless you're doing maximal box jumps or more of like a stiff leg box jumps, or just doing them to focus on the landing part of the jump, then there could be better, more effective exercise that you could do in place of a box jump. But if you're going to focus more on like a max type of box, okay, so just a standing box jump. I mean, that'd be good if you're just going to do it from like just a standstill and then up on the box to work on, just to work on it from like a standstill position instead of running. Horizontal bounds, dumbbell calf raises. But then Saturday sounds like more of a... So actually, like for your Saturday, Cal actually talked about how with his athletes in at the University of Minnesota that he'll do kind of like a bodybuilding day as like an active, and as like an actual active recovery day or active rest day, and that's what your Saturday kind of seems like, because you're doing a lot of core work, but then also incorporating bicep, lying tricep, and then dumbbell bench press. So yeah, I think this is a really, and then Sunday you have a full session. So I think this is a really good layout for a workout. Just with all the workouts, just if you want to really keep track, just keep track of your effort with each workout, and again, quality over quantity. So if you're not hitting, say you're not hitting 6 every time, or say you're not doing 3 sets every time, if you're getting more quality by doing 2 sets of 5, then instead of 3 sets of 6, then that might be better than 3 sets of 6. But I mean, yeah, it's your program, so work with your program and your strengths and weaknesses, and just keep building on it. But that looks good. And so Duncan Nick said, what other exercise would you replace it with? So maybe something like a rhythmic hurdle jump, or even starting from, if you've ever done like a stiff leg box jump, to work on like ankle and like ankle stiffness and foot stiffness. But if you're just doing the standing box jump from like a standstill, that's a good way to do it. And then just really focusing on your landing with that too. I had a question from Brawl Bro 2 from YouTube. Don't think anytime. Brawl Bro said, would you recommend strength training weaker points of your legs while doing speed work for the rest? I don't think there's a bad time to work on strengthening your weak points with any combined type of training. So if he's going to be doing if he's going to be strengthening the weaker points of his legs, I think speed work would just kind of add to that and be an application of that strength. So I don't think that'd be a bad idea to work on the weak points and then also speed. Dunks with Nick, I'm about to do core now. See you later. All right, have fun. I think that's about all the questions I had for this Q&A. Diego said, what type of things would you recommend to do for conditioning? Are you talking about conditioning like for a sport, like a specific sport, or just stamina, like that type of conditioning? Diego said, I'm talking about stamina for basketball. Okay, so the one thing about training for basketball as like a sport is that you're not only going to be tying in like some of the power training that you would be doing for vertical jumping, but you're going to have to also practice endurance. So I think that's where that conditioning comes in. So with that, you could do like higher volume sprints or higher volume stairs, or if you have a hill, like running up a hill would be good. Just incorporating higher volume but still keeping the intensity up would be good to work for conditioning. I mean, or just playing in games, like playing in more games than you usually would for like for the sport, or like however you're training for it. Then that could also help your stamina. So if you if you play in 5 to 6 games, or if you play 5 to 6 games outside or something, then you're going to be working on your stamina for playing one game for your team. So I think that'd be the best way to do it, is just to actually play more of the sport if you really want to work on stamina for basketball specifically. But yeah, so again, stairs, hill, just sprinting, those would be the best. Brandon Taylor, what's up? There's a bunch of other drills you can do specifically for conditioning. I mean, if you you can measure out like you can measure out multiple distances. Like say, you have 50 yards measured out. You can do a 10-yard sprint and back. Go to 10-yard sprint back, and then go 20-yard sprint back, 30-yard sprint back, 40-yard sprint back, 50-yard sprint back, and then do that multiple times. That's more of like a sprint ladder, so you can do that also to build some conditioning, or just running, practicing like running your mile or something like that. Brandon, it's going good. Thank you. He said, I found your channel a couple weeks ago. Love the progress. I appreciate that. Are you working on your vertical too, Brandon? Yeah, I think that's all the questions I had for this Q&A. Again, just wanted to cover that topic of force absorption and tie it back to triphasic training. I'm going to be splitting up, in the next Q&A, I'm going to be splitting it up into the shorter topical video, see how that does, and then at the beginning of the week, and then leave questions for the Q&A on Fridays like this one, and just take questions. Mikey said, what do you recommend when you are jumping to reach something you are so close but can't get there? Mikey, what do you recommend for jumping to reach something you are so close but you can't get there? So for me, I'm going to bring up that example of that 10-9 touch. So the first time I tried to do that 10-9 touch, I probably tried it 10 times, didn't get it the first time, went back to it on a day where I had more recovery and hadn't practiced, or hadn't trained it, hadn't done any more repetitions with it, and then that was the day that I hit my first like 3 out of 15. So I would say just doing it practicing it consistently, but still giving yourself some time in between when you go to go for that max again. So say you try to max touch something on on Monday, then maybe go back to it like Thursday and practice it again when you're like fully recovered, or even maybe Wednesday. Just whenever your body feels fully recovered, then go back to it and test it. Or if you're at a point where you can touch something that's maybe not that high but really close to that, then I would then practice touching that and getting that consistently, and then going up, the next however many, maybe inch or two, however far away that is, the next maximal point is. I mean, you could also analyze like why you're not touching it, because I noticed that. So I touched it like maybe that 3 out of 15 times the first time I started to get it, and then the time after that, maybe it was like 5 out of 15. Then eventually it was like 9 out of 15. Then it just kept going up, and I was noticing that for me to touch that highest point is that my technique had to improve. So the first time I tried to touch it, I was jumping too close. I noticed I was jumping too close to the bar, maybe didn't have enough speed. And then the next time, I jumped those couple times from a little farther away, and maybe had a little more speed, more traction, and I noticed that I actually got up to it. And then after that, it was like that's what became consistent, is the technique and how I was actually approaching it and going for that maximal touch. So yeah, just picking out those different technique things, and again, just being consistent with it. Brandon said, I'm trying, man. I'm like 6'3", so I should probably already be dunking, but I am pretty sure 230 pounds is too heavy. Yeah, but I mean, if you're working at it, and if you know that you want to dunk, and that if you want to lose weight or whatever your goals are, then that's going to help you get to those results. So I mean, like I was just talking about with touch, the max touch. If you want to improve your vertical, just stay consistent, with everything that you're doing to improve it, and then you'll start to see those results. Egan said, "What kind of protein shake do you recommend?" Egan, I don't really buy any type of specific protein powder, like any type of brand or anything. But right now, I think I have like a Kind, like the brand Kind. I think it has like 20 grams of protein, something with higher protein, lower fat. If that's what you're going for, if you're looking for more of like a bulking, then look for something with a little more fat, a little more carbs and calories. But yeah, nothing. I mean, with protein shakes, it's really just it depends on what you're looking for. If you want higher protein, or if you want higher protein just specifically, or higher protein with higher fat, carbs and calories. But yeah, I would recommend something that's just a little bit, just higher protein in general, if you're looking for just a supplement. Mikey said, "Thanks, man. Wow, 10.9 is a little under a foot off my max touch." Ian said, "Okay, cool. Appreciate it. You're awesome." Thanks, man. You too. Rodrigo said, "I am 5'6". I start on the gym in the first week. My max vert goes down, but now a month to start to go up." Rodrigo, that could be just because you've allowed some time for recovery, and your body has adapted to that training that you did in those first weeks of training. So if you hadn't actually trained your vertical before, then your body could be adapting to that new type of training, or new stress that you're putting on it. So maybe that's why you saw your vertical go down at first, but then as time went on, you allowed for some recovery. Then your body was able to adapt, and you've been seeing improvements. Brandon said, "I could jump up and snap the rim pretty easily, but I think my goal is to be around 190, 200 because most dunkers my height and weight are around that much." Yeah, that'd be a good way to target. I mean, it could be different for you too, but yeah, just see how how your vertical changes, how your strength changes with your weight, and just build it around what would be like most optimal for you. But yeah, I have seen before people who lose weight, or like a significant amount of weight, that their vertical actually improves. So yeah, just play with it and see how it goes for you. But yeah, I think I'm going to end this Q&A here. I didn't have any more questions that I want to answer from the week. So again, these are going to be split up next time. So look for the topical Q&A earlier in the week if you guys are new to these. And then Friday is going to be more like this, where it's just taking questions instead of the topic itself. So stay tuned for that. And Brandon said, I heard cardio is pretty bad for your vert. Should I just do like intense intervals? Brandon, so yeah, I mean, it might not be that cardio is necessarily like bad for your vertical, but it's more of like the volume or endurance type of training. So if you're wanting to focus more on power, then yeah, you should maybe focus more on the intense intervals. But if you're wanting to do it to maybe burn more calories, lose, or to help you get to that calorie deficit to lose weight, then incorporating cardio might not be a bad thing for your vertical at that point. So it's kind of based on the circumstance. So even though even though it might seem bad at the beginning for your vertical if you're doing like that type of work, but you're losing weight, then it could be beneficial for your vertical later on. Cal actually talked about this in that podcast, is that, you know, in that eccentric phase of the triphasic training, you might see decreases in strength or power because you're doing a lot more muscle breakdown than building. But what you're setting yourself up for could be you know, a point that you've never even got to before that. So even though you're going through that muscle damage and breakdown with the heavy eccentric training, that it's gonna pay off later on. So, you know, cardio with your case could be different. It could be that it's good for you to lose weight and get in the calorie deficit, but later on it could be beneficial for your vertical. So yeah, I think I'm going to end the Q&A here. I'm going to post all the links in the description again right after this video if you guys want to check anything out that I talked about in this Q&A. And yeah, stay tuned for the split in the next ones earlier in the week, and then for the Friday one. But I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next one.